Okay, so, we're all about making positive changes in our lives,
I am.
right? Like leveling up in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to something you already know are super important habits.
Habits, those things we do almost without thinking.
Totally. And we're diving deep today into a book that really gets into the nitty-gritty of how habits work and how we can actually reprogram them, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg.
I'm excited to dig into this one because I feel like I've read a lot about habits, but I'm always looking for those really practical insights that I can actually use.
That's what we're going for here. Not just theory, but actionable stuff you can start experimenting with right away.
Love it. So where do we even begin with this whole habit thing?
Well, Duhigg starts with this core concept called the habit loop. It's like the foundation of how habits actually function in our brains.
Okay, break it down for us. What's this habit loop all about?
All right, so imagine it like a three-part cycle. First, you've got the cue, that's the trigger, the thing that sets the whole habit in motion. Could be anything, really, like a certain time of day, a specific location, even a particular emotion you're feeling.
Right, I always crave chocolate around 3 p.m. It's like clockwork.
Exactly, that's your cue. Then comes the routine, which is the actual behavior you do in response to the cue. So in your case, it's grabbing that chocolate bar.
And then comes the reward, the reason why our brains love habits so much.
You got it. The reward is that little hit of satisfaction you get that reinforces the habit loop and makes you want to repeat it in the future. So with your chocolate craving, the reward might be that sugar rush or that feeling of comfort that chocolate gives you.
Makes total sense. So basically our brains are constantly looking for these cues, routines, and rewards, right? It's like they're trying to automate as much as possible.
Exactly. And Duhigg calls this process chunking. It's like our brains are taking these complex behaviors and compressing them into these simple automated programs.
Like when you first learn to drive a car, it's like this massive mental effort. But after a while, it becomes second nature. You're not even thinking about all the individual steps.
Precisely. That's chunking at work, freeing up mental space for other things.
So I'm guessing this whole habit loop thing can be both a good and a bad thing, depending on the habit.
Totally helpful for things like brushing our teeth or getting ready in the morning. Not so helpful when it comes to mindless snacking or spending too much time on social media.
All right, so let's make this practical for everyone listening. Think about a habit you want to change. Maybe it's hitting the snooze button every morning or checking your phone constantly. What's the cue that triggers that habit?
And what's the routine you go through? And the reward you get, even if it's just a few extra minutes of sleep or that little dopamine hit from seeing a notification.
Once you've kind of deconstructed that habit loop, Duhigg gives us this really interesting rule for changing habits. It's called the golden rule.
Yeah, the golden rule of habit change. And it's pretty counterintuitive.
Because you'd think it's all about willpower, right? Just force yourself to stop doing the bad habit.
But Duhigg says that's not the most effective approach because those neural pathways are already so deeply ingrained.
So what's the secret sauce then?
The golden rule states that you can't really eliminate a bad habit, you can only replace it. And the key is to keep the cue and the reward the same, but swap out the old routine for a new one.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how do we actually put this golden rule into practice?
Duhigg lays out a pretty clear 4-step framework. So first up, you've got to identify the routine, get really specific about what you're actually doing when that habit takes over.
So instead of just saying, I procrastinate, you might say, when I'm supposed to be working on a project, I end up scrolling through social media for hours.
Exactly. Get granular with it. Then step 2 is to experiment with rewards. This is where you get curious about what's really driving the habit. Is it stress relief, boredom, a sense of accomplishment? Test out different rewards after the routine to see what truly satisfies your brain.
So if your habit is snacking when you get home from work, try replacing those chips with a healthy snack. Or maybe going for a quick walk to see if it satisfies that same need.
Exactly. It's like being a scientist with your own habits.
All right, what's next?
Step 3 is all about isolating the cue. This is where you become a detective and start paying close attention to what's happening right before the habit kicks in.
Like keeping a journal for a few days and noting down the time, location, your mood, any specific triggers that might be present.
Right. Is it always after a stressful meeting? Is it when you're feeling lonely or tired? Is it in a particular room of your house?
And then once you've got a handle on the cue and the reward, you can move on to the final step, creating a new routine.
This is where you get to be creative and intentional about designing a new behavior that will satisfy the same reward, but in a more positive way.
So if your cue is feeling overwhelmed after work, and your reward is relaxation instead of reaching for a glass of wine, you might try going for a run or meditating.
Exactly. It's about finding a healthier, more fulfilling way to meet that same underlying need.
I love this framework. It's so practical, and it really empowers you to take control of your habits instead of feeling like you're at their mercy.
And it's not just about changing bad habits either. It's about creating positive ones too.
Right, because building good habits can be just as challenging as breaking bad ones.
And Duhigg talks about these super powerful habits called keystone habits.
Keystone habits.
Oh.
I like the sound of that. What are they all about?
They're like foundational habits that have this ripple effect on other areas of your life. When you start doing them consistently, they create this momentum that makes it easier to adopt other good habits.
So they're like the key that unlocks a whole bunch of other positive changes.
Precisely. And Duhigg gives some really compelling examples like exercise.
Oh yeah, I can definitely see that. When I'm exercising regularly, I tend to eat better, sleep better, have more energy overall.
Right. It sets off this chain reaction. And another interesting one is making your bed every morning. It seems like such a small thing, but studies have shown it's correlated with increased productivity and a greater sense of well-being.
It's like that feeling of accomplishment first thing in the morning. Sets the tone for the rest of the day.
And then there's something like regular family dinners. Research suggests it can strengthen family bonds, improve communication, and even boost academic performance in kids.
I never thought of making my bed or having family dinner as these like life-changing habits, but I'm starting to see how they can be.
It's all about those small wins, creating this upward spiral of positive change.
So I'm curious, what could be a keystone habit for you listening? What's one small change you could make that might have that ripple effect on other areas of your life?
It's worth reflecting on. Now, as you're thinking about these changes, Duhigg emphasizes something really important, the role of belief.
Belief, like believing in yourself.
Exactly. Because when you're trying to establish new habits, there will inevitably be setbacks, challenges, moments when you feel like giving up.
Oh, absolutely. Those are the times when it's so easy to fall back into those old familiar patterns.
And that's when belief comes in. Duhigg talks about Alcoholics Anonymous and how a big part of their success is fostering this unwavering belief that change is possible.
They create this community of support where people can see others who have overcome addiction, and it reinforces that belief that they can do it too.
Right. That shared belief is so powerful. It helps people stay committed even when things get tough.
It makes me think about the people in our lives who support our growth, who believe in us even when we doubt ourselves.
And it's also about cultivating that inner belief that we are capable of change, that we have the strength and resilience to overcome obstacles.
Because if we don't believe it deep down, it's going to be so much harder to make those lasting changes.
Absolutely. Now, building on this idea of preparing for challenges, Duhigg introduces this really practical strategy called implementation intentions.
Implementation intentions. That sounds kind of technical. What exactly are they?
They're basically if-then plans for your habits. You
Okay.
predetermine how you're going to respond to specific cues so you don't have to rely on willpower in the moment.
Like a pre-programmed response to those tricky situations.
Exactly. Duhigg uses the example of Starbucks. They train their baristas to handle difficult customer interactions with very specific scripts and procedures.
So if a customer is complaining about their order, the barista knows exactly what to say and do to de-escalate the situation.
Right. It takes the decision-making out of the equation and helps them stay calm and collected under pressure.
So how can we use implementation intentions for our own habits?
It's about anticipating those moments when you're most likely to slip up and creating a plan for how you'll handle them.
So if your cue is feeling stressed after work and your old routine is pouring yourself a drink, your implementation intention might be, if I feel stressed after work, then I'll go for a walk instead.
Exactly. You're basically pre-committing to a specific action so you don't have to think about it in the moment.
And that can make all the difference when those cravings or urges hit.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of being proactive, one of the most fundamental steps in changing any habit is simply becoming aware of it in the first place.
I feel like that's something we often overlook. We just go through life on autopilot without really paying attention to our habits.
It's true. So many of our behaviors are just these unconscious routines that we don't even think twice about.
So how do we start bringing those habits into our conscious awareness?
It's as simple as starting to pay attention to what you do throughout the day. Notice those automatic actions, the things you do without even thinking.
Like when you reach for your phone first thing in the morning, or how you respond to stress, or what you do when you're bored.
Exactly. Just observe without judgment. It's like becoming a scientist of your own behavior.
I'm sensing a challenge for everyone listening this week.
Yes. Spend a few days really tuning into your habits. What are those unconscious routines that are running your life? Just noticing them is the first step toward potentially changing them.
So to recap this deep dive into the power of habits, we explore the habit loop, that three-part cycle of cue, routine, and reward, and how understanding those elements gives us the power to change.
We talked about the golden rule of habit change, replacing the routine while keeping the cue and reward consistent.
We learned about the magic of keystone habits, those foundational habits that can trigger positive changes in other areas of our lives.
We discussed the importance of belief in sustaining habit change, especially when we face challenges and setbacks.
And we explored practical strategies like implementation intentions and the power of awareness in shaping our habits.
It's really empowering to realize that we're not just slaves to our habits. By understanding how they work, we can take control and make intentional changes.
It's not about overnight transformations, but about making those small, consistent efforts that can lead to big results over time.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the science of habit formation. We hope you've gained some valuable insights that you can apply to your own life.
We're always here to support you on your journey of personal growth. Stay tuned for the next deep dive.